Coalesce podcast. My name is Grant.
I'm Meg.
And this morning we're going to look at this concept of what a data source is. We did this a little bit before, but it's a pretty simple case. We're just handing in a question ID and then getting back that particular question ID. You can do a lot more with that. So what we want to do is we were trying to think up kind of a weird thing we could do with a data source. And so this is what we came up with. We said, hey, what if you could search based on a string of the correct answers? So like, let's say you wanted to find all the answers to questions that were 1945. Like, for example, I hope that's the answer to the first question. That we could find all the questions that were that had an answer, or maybe like it starts with or contains 1945 for the correct answer. So that's kind of, a semi-useless thing to build. But the way we would do that is, you could do maybe some of this. Ooh, this gets pretty tricky because we're actually filtering a question based on a child object. Right. You can also do this based on child collection. There's a whole bunch of things you can do there. We can based on any question, any answer, lots of different options. So let's go ahead and do that. We want to go ahead and build out that data source. And we're going to show you a couple things kind of along the way as we build that to kind of give you a flavor of what's going on. So
to start, let's stop our end. We're going to head over to the back end. And we did kind of talk about data sources briefly. I don't recall which episode, but it was one of those earlier episodes. And I think there's this handy little diagram that we can look
yeah,
at.
that's super nice. Yeah.
So the way that data sources work is you have actually more than just a get query. You have lots of different things you can override. So when you call list on an item, it calls this get list async method, which calls this get query async, which calls get query. And then after that gets called, you do your list filtering. You do your counts, your total counts, that's used for paging. You apply sorting. So this is kind of the order that these methods get called in your code. So if you want to override any of these, it's important to understand where in this kind of hierarchy of this call you're overriding.
Because if you go down to one of the very bottom ones and you override, like you could be, if you're not taking what's coming in, you're just wiping out everything that was done before, which may be exactly what you want, but it may also not be what you want. So we find most of the time we're doing that get query async, overriding that or get query to make that all happen.
Yeah, it's also important to note that the paging is kind of happening at the end here. So
right.
in these guys up here, you always want to make sure that you're keeping your data, or you're not executing to your database, because you're going to be executing on everything, not just on what you're paging by.
Right. And you are getting a count in the middle. No, you have to do that because if you want to do paging, you have to actually get a count. So there are some kind of tricky things. So it would be worth looking. If you want to get into this, go ahead and look at, the source code's obviously out there at GitHub on IntelliTech Coalesce. So I just jump in there and take a look. So yes, we're going to go ahead and build one. And we're basically just, most of the time you will override that get query. And so we're going to go ahead and do that in this data source that we're building.
So we're just going to make a new data source class, just like we did in the answers. It's going to be called questions, maybe correct. We'll just call it questions data source for now. Maybe come up with a better name in the future.
Yeah, and the typical naming convention is to do it whatever, it's an object, and then probably what it does in a data source is a typical name for those things.
And then standard data source.
And you see here, we're inheriting from the standard data source. Now you wouldn't have to, there's an interface or things you can do on top of that, but really you want all that base behavior most of the time, and you just want to override some of it. So again, you can go and rewrite the whole thing if you want, but you're going to find yourself doing a bunch of extra work. So I would just go do the standard data source, and then let's just go ahead and override the methods that we particularly need. And usually, again, it's right at the beginning. It's usually you don't have to mess around with the paging and the ordering and things like that. Part of the thing is that this works with the built-in filtering, ordering, and searching that we used in the past. So if in the last episode, when we did that kind of using all the built-in things, all of that, this is how all of that works. And so if you want to disable some of those things, you can override methods in here that's going to stop that from happening. And you can also then extend what you're able to do.
Now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to call appdb context directly here. So I think I said this in kind of one of those earlier episodes when we were writing our answers data source. All this is doing is pretty much the same thing as as db dot and then whatever your list is. So questions, for example, and then returning that.
But it is also doing the base includes.
It is also doing some includes for you. Right. So you notice that when you make that call, you get all your answers included, and you get your correct answer included. So it's doing all those includes for you. So if we just did db dot questions, we're not doing any includes here.
This will not include your correct answer or any of the answers.
Yep.
If you literally just did that.
Yeah, so you'd have to do it manual includes, but for now, we're just gonna kind of see what happens.
Yep.
So DB questions, and then we do need to include our correct
We
answer.
actually don't have to.
Well, we don't because
you can search on a thing without having to be, it'll automatically, what includes means it's going to return it. You can still query off of things that aren't returned, which is kind of a cool feature of EF, right? But we can go ahead and, we can go ahead and include that. The application might not actually work if we don't hand back the correct answer. So
it won't be super obvious on the front end what's going on. It will query by it, but then when you get to the front end, you'll get the questions. So, you could use that. I think it depends how you want maybe user to interact with this.
You just have the option to kind of shape your data however you want to shape it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're gonna have to write a where that is aware off of the child element, right? And this is just EF stuff. So if you don't quite tracking with this, go ahead and take a look at the EF docs, and that'll probably be pretty helpful. So now we're gonna go correct answer, and then we're gonna do.
How do we want to do it?
Let's do it contains.
Okay.
On the text of the answer. Does that sound?
Yeah.
That way you kind of do. And now, what does it contain? Like we don't have anything that we passed in. I suppose we could pass in and look at so if you look at the parameters there, the parameters are going to have all of the things that we passed in with respect to, so we hit the dot. Yeah, so these are a whole bunch of things that are available with respect to what gets passed into the method from the client side. So you can, again, override, you have to be able to override all the things and do everything that you can do in the regular filtering and searching and sorting. So what we do here is we just create literally just a property that has the thing that we want to pass in.
Yeah, let's say maybe correct answer query or.
Yeah, answer text or something like correct answer text. That's good.
And then set. And if you guys remember from the answer data source, we do need to mark this with Coalesce to tell it to include it in the API.
You might have another method that you need to make public for testing, whatever, that would be that. So that's why that is there. And the reason we don't have to mark the data source as Coalesce is that because we have it's inside the class that we're actually building.
Yeah. Now this guy is upset because it could be null.
Right. So we're going to have to actually break this apart and only run this check if we actually have a value that is the value populated in that field.
So we can just do something like this.
So you can either kind of do a chaining thing where you define a variable and then you continue to chain methods onto that, or you can just write it kind of twice, one with the information and then one without.
Yeah, and I think we'll just say, let's just return. So we can do, let's do it the way Grant's talking about. It's a little bit cleaner, maybe. So we can say questions equals db dot questions. We can tack that included on here.
So you kind of do all the base stuff that you want to do up here. And you can basically just then return something with your where clause.
Yeah, and then we don't need it to be this insane looking. Just bi variable of type question one. That probably would have been faster to write than using the dot operator there, but it's okay. And then here we're just going to do a where, just like that. This could probably be all one line because it's so small.
Yep.
Okay, and then this is a nullability issue, and this is kind of where nullability doesn't work super well with entity framework. Like we have it included here, and I believe it isn't required, so not a good example. But even if this was required, it would still be throwing problems at you. So this is complaining that it's not. It's possibly null. It could definitely be null. So something that we could handle. And no, should we handle this issue?
Let's just let it go for right now, and then we can come back and kind of address that later.
It's just a little bit more code. It's not too bad though.
Yeah. I think you can put a question mark after that.
You can't inside of the lambda.
Okay.
It doesn't like that. So you have to do kind of a full.
So we have to check the nullability of that field.
Yeah.
I mean, we could, either way. So if it's null, it's going to return a false, right? So
yeah, it might throw an exception here.
Well, we may have to do a kind of an or statement or.
But I don't think we haven't not set any of our correct answers, so
So they're all set, right? So you might have to make that a little bit more specific.
just go fix this in the future.
So right now, if we run this and use our data source,
Mhm.
let's go ahead and look at what that, well, do we have to run Coalesce here?
We do have to run Coalesce.
Because we made a data source and that's actually going to create front end code. Anytime you create new TypeScript code, you're going to have to run Coalesce to make that happen. So
Yeah, and I don't have my nice thing anymore. It's okay though.
you have it. It's right down there. It's called the terminal window inside of Visual Studio.
All right, where is it?
Okay, so if you go down, okay, we're going to do this. So in your output, so like your output window, if you go up to view up on the top,
This is, I like never use this.
oh, sorry, you have to go all the way to the top. You have to
Oh,
actually open
all
it all the way to the top. View, and then there's,
Oh,
you could, yeah.
one sec. Let's get rid of the Teams bar so I can do this. There. Yeah, I see what you're saying. That
Yeah, there it is. So now it's just you're right here in the app. I know, I'm kind of.
Grant's gonna convert me because I don't have
Yeah.
this terminal. I reset my computer to
Yes.
try and fix my keyboard issues.
So do you start out web? And Megan's a huge fan of having a clear console window, so you can see your deals and clears all the time.
It's regretful though when you want to scroll back up. Okay,
Okay, so it built out these couple of models. You can see a few models there that got built for it.
let's run that.
And we did not mark this as a default data source. So
We didn't.
if we would have marked this as a default data source, this would be the data source that just gets used all the time. So
Do you want to do that really quick?
we don't have to. I mean, we should basically see no change.
Yeah.
Is kind of the idea here that we're not going to see anything different in this particular case.
We do have to hook up all the stuff in the front.
Yeah, so there's nothing hooked up on the front. So it should see, it looks exactly the same. Now you see at the bottom on the questions, it's showing the answers. We are not including the answers in our data source, but the default data source is still in place. It's using that by default. Now we could come in here on the front end and go ahead and change that so that you can actually start using it. So let's go into the questions page. We're looking at all of our questions and loading the data source.
Make this a little bigger and then come down here. Close up some of this stuff so it doesn't look so messy. Okay, so up here for questions, we just want to set the data source here. So questions dot data source equals new question. I think it was on models. Maybe I'm wrong. No, I'm right. All right. Questions data source. Add that guy.
So you can have more than one data source because you may need multiple ways to do this. So just one thing to remember is when you have data sources, you can have many data sources for a particular object. But you can only have one behavior, and the behaviors are set because you don't want people to swapping out behaviors from the front end, or it's okay to swap out data sources. Now, one thing to also know about the data source is that you do get back inside the data source what the current user is, and you can dependency inject things into that just like you can into other things.
Yeah.
So just remember.
Sorry, I've got a new computer, so I gotta fix what I'm using for my formatter there.
Yeah, so here, the reason Meg actually made her data source is because we want to be able to reference that
Yeah.
in other places in the app, or in other places on the page.
Here too, that we want to be able to set before
Yep.
we do more with it. So this is gonna need to be tied. Well, we could probably
Just
tie
tie it to a text box, right?
Just go do that.
Well, right now we can do nothing. So if we put that in there right now, let's go ahead and show what happens.
Yes, so this is what happens.
Boom, okay, so that's exactly what we expected.
Yep.
Because you were not including the collections, the answers, so we don't see the answers. Unfortunately, our code is robust enough that if there are no answers, it doesn't fail, it just doesn't show them.
Yeah, maybe. Are there any errors? That looks happy.
Oh, look at that, man. So we're building this, and we do not have a master plan on how we're building this. Each time we just figure out what we're gonna add next, so.
You can see our random question still comes back with everything, so that's different. Different.
Totally different, and we're using a different data source for that,
Yeah,
because it's just a single question.
I think it's actually. I don't
Or
think
are we
it's
just
data-
looking it up? I think that's, yeah, we may have to.
I don't even remember what we did. We did, I think, a function.
Yep.
Oh, a service. We did this.
But we did a service, yeah. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add a box, yet again, another text box to the filtering section, which would be horrible UI for the most part. And this really should be baked into the search box, but for right now, for the case of showing how things work, let's go ahead and just add another text field.
So let's see, let's just put, it'll look really pretty. We'll put it up
It's gonna
here
look beautiful until already.
and we'll make it the whole columns with, that way it's not sharing room with the other ones. All right, so it's gonna be, instead of this, it's gonna be, oh, I had it on there. What I call it, it was just data source
Yeah, I forget. Yeah, data source. Yep.
dot correct answer text.
And this is the cool part. Like you saw right there that with the IntelliSense for TypeScript popped up and showed you the right thing. And so now we can actually search for these things. And when you say high details, what happens? What does that do for you?
Oh, so high details, you can kind of see, oops. There's this extra space under.
Yeah.
And the details shows things like error messages, or you can put like custom messages there too. It's just as a reserved space. That way, when something does pop up, it doesn't pop your UI up.
Yeah, right, totally.
Yeah, whatever it shows, which can be annoying. But I don't expect to have any details under this.
There's really no way to make it wrong.
Yeah.
You can't search.
It's either empty or it's full of whatever you.
So now that should just be all bound up and ready to go. So
Yes, there we go. But
oh, we don't have any answers. What about 1945? I hope that's the right answer.
yeah, I don't remember what all right answers are. Yeah, that looks right.
There, boom, there it is. That's the only. Now, if we would have had a little more robust question set, we could find all of the questions that had an answer of 1945.
Yeah, if we had maybe, I think I don't think any of our correct answers are shared between our questions, so.
Yeah, but it wouldn't matter if they
Definitely
were.
cheating, but.
Yeah, for sure. Now, the thing is, if they wouldn't necessarily have to be a common answer, because every answer has to be a direct child
Mhm.
of the actual question. So, like, we couldn't actually share.
You can share like the text.
The text, yeah, the text would be the same in this case. So, like, if you said it was like May 1945, that would still pop up on here because we're doing contains.
Yeah.
Note that this is not a super fast wave search database. It is going to do more of a scan. It can't use indexes and things like that. If you do want to do a full table search, you could do that. And this is where you put that in, or a full text search. This is where you would add your full text search in.
Yeah.
You can basically search however you want.
You just do it right
Get that
where
information
we
back.
did it, just a little bit more custom.
Now, we actually don't want to have this customized this way. We actually wanted to return all the answers. So in this case, we could do one of two things. We could say, hey, let's go ahead and return, include those answers. So let's go ahead and include the answers. Let's just do that as part of our initial include, just to show that it works. Now, I don't think you would have had to stop.
Maybe.
It depends. You never know.
Like sometimes works.
Yeah.
I just don't trust it.
But sometimes it works really well. You don't have to restart your app. So I would encourage you to play with hot reload. You have to be a little bit careful. It's either going to work or it's not. You'll usually get an error, or not an error. It'll say, hey, you can't continue running, edit your code. And sometimes you make no changes to your code. You just never know. So, okay, so there it is. And this is the data source. And now you can see that the filtering should still work as well. So
yeah,
just the regular searching and your categories and your and everything else. There you go. Oh, perfect. And so it's still searching on all the different pieces, but they're searching for a correct answer. So this gives you a lot of options as far as doing your filtering for your results and having that really strongly typed filtering and not just having to worry about a general filter field. Now, this also works with, we could have done the category. You can hand back arrays as well and numbers. You could, like, let's say you want to sort by several fields. You could have a sort 1, a sort 2, a sort 3,
yeah,
and maybe some indications on whether they're ascending or descending. All of those things. If you want to build something complicated out that isn't supported by the base Coalesce set of filters, you can go ahead and just build those using a data source. So probably the right way to do this is to go ahead and call that base.
Yeah.
In this case,
this will do, because we're including basically all the navigation properties that we want.
Right.
So there's no reason to do otherwise. And then here, why don't we just fix this really quick? Let's just do where. This is probably a bit of a cheap way to do it, but I'm gonna do it this way. That won't be, no, there you go.
great. So now you can make that change. You just have to check it. Now, there does bring up a really interesting thing. Is that for EF, it is just doing a conversion into SQL. And there are things that it can convert to SQL and there are things that it can't. And so you just have to know those parts of how Entity Framework works. There's certain things that just aren't going to work in the way that you structure things. Like you may be able to do a string contains one way and it's going to convert to SQL, and other ways you can't. And so here we tried to do the change, and it may be because you changed the return, who knows? But in this case, you have to stop your app and go ahead and restart it. But
Doesn't like it.
I think that gives a decent kind of overview on the things that data sources do. You can override many methods inside those. There's a lot of things going on. There's actually several different parts of the data source. Just getting a count. If you only ask for a count, there's a simpler thing that happens. If you're asking for the whole thing, it's doing something else.
It's down here. So if we were getting a random question from just what you're seeing on the page here, and maybe, or even if we were doing some kind of front end filter where we weren't including that here or whatever, you could change this count to kind of reflect that.
Right. You could just say, hey, I know we're only ever getting back once. You can maybe eliminate some of that logic, maybe speed things up a little bit. Yeah. But there actually is a count method as well, where you can just ask it rather than querying and getting back all the questions. You can just say, hey, how many things are in this? And it will just give you back a count. So that's also a thing. If you look at that docs page, it kind of shows the different methods that you can call in there. So
yeah. And then the sorting, if you did want to override that, there's
yes,
you'd override that with. So
you can't sort in here. That's a great point, Meg.
You can totally sort in there, but it won't always be applied.
It will probably get overridden later because the sorting happens later in the process. So, like for example, because part of the process you get a count. If there's nothing in the collection, well, there's no reason to go ahead and do a bunch of sorting and things like that. So we do have the pieces that kind of fit together.
So there's definitely lots more to override in here, but this is probably the most common one that you are going to override.
That's great. You're all set.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, next time we're going to figure out some fun things to show you. We've got a few questions about. There aren't a lot of controls built into Coalesce. Somebody said, hey, there's not a lot. Well, the reality is that there's all the things in Beautify, which is over 100 controls. And so I think we're just going to take kind of a little stroll through Beautify and take a look at what kinds of controls you can use. Even though this is somewhat Coalesce adjacent, I think it's really helpful just to know what's available as far as your containment controls, your kind of action buttons, the different kinds of things that you can do to make a really nice looking UI.
Yeah.
And honestly, if you're a developer and you thought, I've just never really been that, I can't make nice looking things. Well, oftentimes it's not because you're a horrible person. It might be because of that, but probably not. It's really probably because you just haven't spent any time studying it. I mean, I am not a super creative person, but I think I can build decent user interfaces because I've just spent some time learning the mechanics about what makes good user interface. So we're going to kind of take a look at a little bit of that just in a really quick overview. I think it'll be helpful the next time we do a podcast. So until then, keep on building awesome Coalesce apps.
Thanks all.